بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، وبعد. أحيي إخواني وأخواتي الإخوة والأخوات في الله، أهل السنة والجماعة، وما يجعلنا وإياكم منهم، أصحاب العقيدة والمنهج الصحيح لأهل السنة والجماعة، المقتدون بالرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم ثم بالسلف من بعده، أول السلف الصحابة رضي الله عنهم. نبدأ بنوع توفيقي في شرح الأصل السادس من أصول الستة. سمع يا أخي؟
نعم.
سمعني يا أخي؟
نعم معك شيخنا.
يقول ابن عبد الوهاب رد الشبهة التي وضعها الشيطان في ترك القرآن والسنة واتباع الآراء والأهواء المتفرقة المختلفة، لأن القرآن والسنة لا يعرفهما إلا المجتهد المطلق. رد الشبهة التي وضعها الشيطان في ترك القرآن والسنة واتباع الآراء والأهواء المتفرقة المختلفة، لأن القرآن والسنة لا يعرفهما إلا المجتهد المطلق. يقول الشيخ الفوزان في شرح هذا الأصل في كتابه شرح الأصول الستة، هذا هو الأصل الأخير وهو مهم جدا، وهو أنهم يقولون إنا لا نعرف معاني الكتاب والسنة ولا يمكن أن نعرفها لا يعرفها إلا العلماء الكبار. سامحني يا أخي، عفوا.
طيب ترجم يا شيخنا.
السلام عليكم. نعم يا أخي، بس دلوقتي أنا عندي محاضرة للخارج، لو سمحت بعد شوية، بعد نص ساعة كده. فيقول الشيخ الفوزان بارك الله فيه: هذا هو الأصل الأخير والمهم جدا، وهو أنهم يقولون إنا لا نعرف معاني الكتاب والسنة ولا يمكن أن نعرفها ولا يعرفها إلا العلماء الكبار. هذا قولهم الناس أهل البدع يعني. فيقال لهم القرآن فيه أشياء واضحة يعرفها العامي ويعرفها المتعلم وتقوم بها الحجة على الخلق، وفي أشياء لا يعرفها إلا العلماء، وفي أشياء لا يعلمها إلا الله. يقول لهم القرآن فيه أشياء واضحة يعرفها العامي ويعرفها المتعلم وتقوم بها الحجة على الخلق، في أشياء لا يعرفها إلا العلماء، وفي أشياء لا يعلمها إلا الله. نعم، يوجد في القرآن والسنة أمور لا يعرفها إلا المجتهد المطلق. يوجد في القرآن والسنة أمور لا يعرفها إلا المجتهد المطلق، يعني عنده اجتهاد في الدين. يعني هذا كلام حسن البنا، يعني قرأ في كتب السنة وتعلم من العلماء، فهذا ثم تبحر في العلم فأصبح من أهل العلم. فهذا لذا كان عنده من علوم يعرف أشياء لا يعرفها غيره ممن لم يحضر علمه. لكن توجد أشياء كثيرة كلام الشيخ فوزان يعرفها العوام، يعرفها المتعلم الذي حاز على قدر يسير من العلم، مثل قوله تعالى: واعبدوا الله ولا تشركوا به شيئا، وقوله: إنه من يشرك بالله فقد حرم الله عليه الجنة ومواه النار. هذه الآيات يفهمها كل إنسان. طبعا المفسرون كلام حسن البنا، المفسرون يجدون أشياء يشرحون شروحا، ولكن ممكن عامي يفهم المعنى العام الآية. يوجد أشياء كلام الشيخ فوزان كثيرة يعرفها العوام ويعرفها المتعلم الذي حاز على قدر يسير من العلم. فقوله تعالى: اعبدوا الله ولا تشركوا به شيئا، وقوله: إنه من يشرك بالله فقد حرم الله عليه الجنة ومواه النار، ومثل ولا تقربوا الزنا، يعرف كل إنسان عام ومتعلم، ومثل حرمت عليكم الميتة، يعرف العام المتعلم، ومثل كل المؤمنين يغضوا من أبصارهم ويحفظوا فروجهم. كل هذه الآيات يعرفها العامي والمتعلم، هذه أمور واضحة يعرفها العامي إذا سمعها. ويقول حسن البنا الآية الكريمة في سورة آل عمران: هو الذي أنزل عليك كتاب من آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب وأخرى متشابهات فأما الذين في قلوبهم مرض فيتبعون سبيلا ابتغاء الفتنة وابتغاء تأويله معناه تأويله إلا الله والراسخون في العلم يقولون آمنا بكل من عند ربنا وما يذكر إلا أولي الألباب. ففي حاجات يعني واضحة باينة يعرفها كل إنسان، وفي حاجات أخرى يعني عاوزة تحتاج إلى علم وشرح. فالناس اللي قلوبهم مرض يتبعون متشابه، يعني الآية تحتمل معنى وتحتمل معنى آخر. من الذي يفصل في القضية؟ المفسرون أهل العلم، فيقولون لنا هذه الآية نأخذها مع الآية كذا فنفهم معناها، لأن الراسخون في العلم يعلمون إن شاء الله ما علمهم الله. فيقول هذه أمور واضحة يعرفها العام إذا سمعها. ثم يقول الشيخ ابن الوهاب رحمه الله والمجتهد هو الموصوف بكذا وكذا أوصافا لعلها لا توجد تامة في أبي بكر وعمر. والمجتهد هو الموصوف بكذا وكذا أوصافا لعلها لا توجد إلا تامة إلى أبي بكر وعمر. يعني الناس أهل البدع كحسن البنا يقول بفضل الله، يعني أهل البدع يجعلون الأمور مستعصية، فيعملون شروطا للمجتهد أو شروط للعلم العالم الذي أو العلم اللي عنده علم الذي يفقه في الدين حديث أو آية أو حديث، فيجعلون صعوبات حتى يصرفوا الناس عن القرآن. يقول الشيخ الفوزان في شرح هذا الأمر يضعون شروطا للمجتهد المطلق قد لا توجد تامة في من هم من أفضل الناس مثل أبي بكر وعمر، وهذا الشروط وضعوها من عند أنفسهم. يضعون شروطا للمجتهد المطلق قد لا توجد تامة في من هم من أفضل الناس مثل أبي بكر وعمر، وهذا الشروط هذه الشروط ما وضعوها من عند أنفسهم. ربنا يعني معنى كلام الشيخ الفوزان ليست هي في الكتاب ولا في السنة، هم وضعوا تعقيدا للأمور وتصعيبا حتى يمشوا بطريق التقليد الأعمى لأشياخهم ويتركون. ومن الناس من يقول الجهال ضعف رقبة عالم وبس سالم، يعني ما تكليش عليك انت مسؤولية، العالم اللي قال خذ منه خلاص قلده. معنى الكلام هذا كله ضلال، والمقلد لا يعتبر من الناس المسلمين الذين يفهمون الإسلام. فالإنسان لا يقلد إنما يتبع بالكتاب والسنة وفقه سلف الأمة أول الصحابة رضي الله عنهم، يقرأ في الكتب ويسمع أهل العلم. يقول الشيخ الفوزان يقول الله تعالى أفلا يتدبرون القرآن، هذا عام للمسلمين، هذه عامة الآية دي. يعني يقول الشيخ الفوزان في كل واحد يقوم بها، كل يعرف من القرآن ما يسر الله له. فالعام يحصل على ما يستطيع، والمتعلم يحصل على ما يستطيع، والراسخ في العلم يحصل على ما يستطيع. أنزل من السماء ماء في الآية الكريمة فسالت أودية بقدرها، يعني كل واحد ربنا يديله بقدر اجتهاده. ربنا يجعل رحمته في الناس وفي السماء وفي الأرض، فهذا كله من آثار رحمة الله، إن كل واحد يجتهد ربنا يديله نصيب اجتهاده. يقول الشيخ الفوزان كل واد يأخذ من السير قدره، كذلك العلم أنزله الله، وكل قلب يأخذ منه بقدر. قلب العام وقلب المتعلم، قلب العالم، قلب الراسخ في العلم، كل واحد يأخذ بقدره وبقدر ما أعطاه الله من الفهم. أما أنه لا يفهم شيء من القرآن إلا المجتهد المطلق، هذا كلام غير صحيح. يقول الشيخ الفوزان كن يعرف من القرآن ما يسر الله له. فالعامي يحصل على ما يستطيع، والمتعلم يحصل على ما يستطيع، والراسخ في العلم يحصل على ما يستطيع. أنزل من السماء ماء فأسال أجرة بقدرها، الآية سورة الرعد الآية 17. كل واحد يأخذ من الشيء قدره، كذلك العلم من أنزله الله، وكل قلب يأخذ منه بقدر. قلب العامي وقلب المتعلم وقلب العالم وقلب الراسخ في العلم، كل واحد يأخذ بقدره وبقدر ما أعطاه الله من الفهم. أما أنه لا يفهم شيئا من القرآن إلا المجتهد المطلق، هذا كلام غير صحيح. يعني هذا كلام شيخ الفوزان. ويقولون محاولة فهم القرآن من التكليف بما لا يستطاع، والشروط التي ذكرها العلماء وقالوا لابد أن تتوفر في المفتي يريدون بها المجتهد المطلق، ولا يريدون أنها لابد أن تتوفر في كل من يريد أن يتدبر القرآن ويستفيد منه. ثم هي شروط لاستنباط الأحكام الغامضة الخفية، وليست شروطا في فهم الأمور واضحة مثل التوحيد والشرك والواجبات الظاهرة والمحرمات الظاهرة. يعني يقولون محاولة فهم القرآن من التكليف بما يستطاع. ده كلام كلام الشيخ فوزان عن مبتدعة كالصوفية وغيرهم، يعقدون الأمور حتى يصلوا إلى التقليد، لا يحبون أن يرجعوا إلى الكتاب والسنة بالأدلة، طبعا بإرشاد العلماء لا يهتمون ويتكاسلون عن ذلك. محاولة فهم القرآن من التكليف بما يستطاع قول العوام من العلم. والشروط التي ذكرها العلماء وقول لابد أن توفر في المفتي يريدون بها المجتهد المطلق. يعني علماء يقول حسن البنا بفضل الله، يعني العلماء اشترطوا شروطا للمجتهد المطلق حتى يفتي. هذا طبعا رجل يحل القضايا، يفصل في القضايا، فأمره عظيم يحتاج إلى علم. علم ليس كسائر العلم، يعني يتبحر في العلم بعد الشيء عشان يفصل في القضايا. مش كل واحد يفصل في القضايا، ليس كل مسلم يفتي، وإذا لم يفتي يبقى ما أدى الواجب. لا، الإفتاء فرض كفاية ليس فرض عين. ويريدون أنها لابد يا شيخ فوزان يقول أن توفر في كل من يريد أن يتدبر القرآن ويستفيد منه. ثم هي شروط لاستنباط الأحكام الغامضة الخفية. هذه الشروط التي وضعوها العلماء للإفتاء دي عشان يفصلوا في القضايا، وليست شرطا في فهم الأمور الواضحة في أمور واضحة مثل التوحيد والشرك والواجبات الظاهرة والمحرمات الظاهرة. كل دي يعرفها العامي ويعرفها المتعلم ويعرفها التقي. الأمور الظاهرة محرمات الظاهرة. ثم يقول الشيخ ابن عبد الوهاب: وجعلنا من بين أن يقول الآية الكريمة ومن طلب الهدى منهما فهو إما زنديق. هذا ابن عبد الوهاب، إما زنديق وإما مجنون. ده قول العوام الصوفية وغيره لأجل صعوبة فهمهما. سبحان الله وبحمده، كم بين الله سبحانه شرعا وقدرا، خلقا وأمرا في رد هذه الشبهة الملعونة من وجوه شتى بلغت إلى حد الضروريات العامة. يقول الشيخ فوزان الآية الكريمة: ولكن أكثر الناس لا يعلمون. الأعراف 187 آية: قد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون. إن جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي الأثقال فهم مقمحون، وجعلنا بين أيديهم سدا وخلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم وهم لا يبصرون، وسواء عليهم أنذرتهم أن تنذرهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. لما تنذرهم من اتبع الذكر وخشى الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة من أجر كريم. سورة ياسين آية 7 إلى آية 11. هذه يقولها الشيخ الآيات. يقول الشيخ ابن عبد الوهاب رحمه الله: كل يعرف من القرآن ما يسر الله له، فالعام يحصل على ما لا استغفر الله. يقول الشيخ ابن عبد الوهاب: ومن طلب الهدى منهما القرآن والسنة فهو إما زنديق وإما مجنون. يصعبون الأمر إلى درجة أن يتهمون الإنسان الذي يأخذ الكتاب والسنة إما زنديق إما مجنون لأجل صعوبة فهمهما. سبحان الله وبحمده، كم بين الله سبحانه شرعا وقدرا، خلقا وأمرا في رد هذه الشبهة الملعونة من وجوه شتى بلغت إلى حد الضروريات العامة. جاب الآية الكريمة الآيات جاب الشيخ الفوزان بارك الله فيه الشيخ ابن عبد الوهاب رحمه الله: ولكن أكثر الناس لا يعلمون. يعني أكثر الناس لا يعلمون لإعراضهم عن العلم، يعرضون عن العلم. يقول حسن البنا بفضل الله: يعني أعرضوا عن العلم لا يعلمون، لو سلكوا طريق العلم لعلموا. سمعني يا أخي؟
نعم نعم أسمع.
لقد حق القول على أكثرهم هم لا يؤمنون. يعني يعرضون عن العلم لا يؤمنون. إلا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا في أثقالهم فهم مقمحون. يعني هذه ربنا جعلهم أغلال لإعراضهم عن العلم. لو فتحوا مشوا في طريق العلم لفتح الله عليهم. وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا من خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون. هذا الآيات الكريمة ذكرها ابن عبد الوهاب رحمه الله. وسواء عليهم أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. حتى لو علموا الجهال أصحاب القلوب المريضة لا يؤمنون. إنما جند ما اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب يسير بمغفرة من أجر كريم يسير من 7 إلى 11. آخر والحمد لله رب العالمين. يقول الشيخ الفوزان: هذه الآيات في المعرضين عن تدبر كلام الله وكلام رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم، وفي آخرها الذي من الله عليه وهو من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب. فهذا مثل الفريقين. هذه الآيات في المعرضين عن تدبر كلام الله وكلام رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم، وفي آخرها الذي من الله عليه وهو من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب. فهذا مثل الفريقين. ثم يقول الشيخ بن عبد آخر والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا إلى يوم الدين. ده كلام الشيخ بن عبد الوهاب. يقول الشيخ الفوزان: ختم الرسالة بمثل ما بدأها به بحمد الله والصلاة والسلام على رسوله، وهذا من محاشر التأليف والتعليم، وذلك بالثناء على الله أولا وآخرا. ختم الرسالة بمثل ما بدأ به من الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسوله، وهذا من محاشر التأليف والتعليم، وذلك بالثناء على الله أولا وآخرا. والصلاة والسلام على رسوله معلم الخير والداعي إلى الله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه ومن اهتدى بهديه صلى على نهجه وتمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين. الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على رسوله معلم الخير والداعي إلى الله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اهتدى بهديه وسار على نهجه وتمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين. الحمد لله رب العالمين. هذا والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. يا إخوة الكرام، هذا نهاية الأصل الثالث، وإن شاء الله المرة الجاية نأتي في أسئلة بقى في هذا الباب نسألها، ونبدأ بعدها إن شاء الله بكتاب آخر إن شاء الله، وهو 6 مواضع من السيرة إن شاء الله للشيخ عبد الوهاب، إذا كان هذا يوافقكم وأنا في خدمتكم حتى نتعلم سويا الكتاب والسنة فقه سلف الأمة. جزاكم الله خير، وفقكم الله، استبدل الله خطاكم، واستغفر الله لكم وسائر المسلمين. كنا وفقنا من فضل الله غير لكم من أنفسنا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. أي خدمة يا أخي.
بارك الله فيكم يا شيخ.
جزاك الله فيكم. استودعكم الله.
بارك
السلام
الله
عليكم.
حياكم الله. عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. The Shaykh started and he started with the khutbah al-Hajah, and after praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and giving the salat and the salam upon the Prophet sallallahu. Then he said that my brothers and sisters who are from those who follow the Sunnah and upon the methodology of the Salaf and upon the correct Aqidah in following the Prophet ﷺ and the Salaf upon that today we'll start with the 6th principle. So the 6th principle, the translation of the 6th principle first. Shaykh started reading the principle first. He said that the 6th principle is refuting the doubt that Shayṭān has placed concerning the abandonment of the Qur'an and the Sunnah, and instead following the scattered and divergent opinions and desires, which is that the Qur'an and the Sunnah are not known except to a mujtahid mutlaq, an absolutely qualified jurist, saying that the Qur'an and the Sunnah, it can't be understood except with the absolutely qualified jurist, and that the mujtahid is described with such and such qualities, i.e. qualities or requirements that the mujtahid has to understand the Qur'an and the Sunnah, with such descriptions that are not even perhaps found completely with Abu Bakr or Umar, and that if a person is not like this with these particular qualities, then he should turn away from them, i.e. from the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And by certain obligation, he should turn away from them by certain obligation. He should certainly turn away from them, in which there is no doubt or difficulty, as they say. So here, with this doubt, then the Shaykh, he started saying that Shaykh Ṣāliḥ Fawzān, he says, reading from the explanation of Shaykh Ṣāliḥ Fawzān, he says that this final principle is a very important principle. It's a very important asal, this final principle of this book. It's muhim jiddan. He says, "Inna la na'rifu ma'ani al-Qur'an wa Sunnah wa la yumkin an na'rifu illa al-ulama al-kibar." That these people, they say that we don't know the meanings of the Qur'an and the Sunnah. We can't understand what the Qur'an and the Sunnah is about. Only the big scholars, as they say, the mujtahid, muṭlaq, the one who is the complete and qualified jurist. He has the highest levels of understandings. Only he can understand the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And as we, as commoners, then we are not able to understand the Qur'an and the Sunnah. This is what they say. Then Shaykh Ṣāliḥ Fawzān, he says that you respond to them by saying that in the Qur'an there are many things which are clear and they are known to the commoner, the one who is a commoner who doesn't have much knowledge, or and known to the scholars, and they are known to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are certain things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has kept within His knowledge. But there are other things within the Qur'an and the Sunnah which the commoner knows and the scholar knows. So meaning that everybody knows, the commoners and the scholars, they all know these things. In refutation of those people who said that the Qur'an and the Sunnah is only understood by the people who have the extreme amount of knowledge, the one who is the mujtahid mutlaq. So he says that there are things which are clear, that the commoner can know them, and the one who has studied a little bit, the one who's muta'allim, he studied and he studies the Qur'an and the Sunnah, and he tries to read into these affairs, then that person he can understand them. So then he says that you find in the Qur'an and the Sunnah those things that there are those things that won't be understood by the commoners, and there are those things which will be understood by the commoners, and there are meaning that there are certain things which only the scholars will understand, but there are other things which the commoners can understand too. And he says that the Qur'an, in the Qur'an and in the Sunnah, he says, for example, a person who reads into the book and the Sunnah, who reads into the Qur'an and he reads into the Sunnah and he tries to study it and understand it, and the one who gains some understanding of this from the scholars and he becomes vast in his knowledge, then he understands certain affairs more than a person who's a commoner. But the commoner, he will also understand aspects of the Sunnah. He will also understand certain affairs of the Sunnah. And it's not correct, as their doubt says, that the Qur'an and the Sunnah completely can't be understood except for the one who has the great amount of knowledge, and that the commoners, they can't understand anything. So this is a refutation of them, saying that there are the Qur'an and the Sunnah, there are aspects of it that the commoners will understand, and there are aspects of it that are a bit more difficult, and only the ones who have gained an amount of knowledge and they've studied and they've gone further in their studies, and they'll understand those aspects. So it differs, he says. It differs according to that degree that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given a person in terms of his understanding. So a person who has little understanding, then he understands that little bit from the Qur'an and the Sunnah in accordance to the amount of understanding he has. And a person who has a greater amount of understanding, if a person Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him more understanding, then he understands more aspects of the Sunnah that perhaps that Ami, that commoner, couldn't understand because of his lack of knowledge. But the point of it being that the commoner, he even understands some parts. Even he understands aspects of the Qur'an and the Sunnah. And it's not just the alim who can understand these things. And the Shaykh, he gives examples. He says, one of the things that the commoner he can understand is aspects of which are linked to Tawheed and Shirk. He says these things, that even the commoner can understand these things. That it's foolishness to say that only the scholars and the ones who have great amounts of knowledge, they can understand what Tawheed and Shirk is. And as for the commoner who doesn't know much, then he can't understand what Tawheed and Shirk is. He says this is false. This is not correct. That the commoner, he can understand these kind of things, Tawheed and Shirk. Even the common person who hasn't gone into, delved deep into understanding the Sunnah and studied for a long time, even he has the ability to understand these kind of affairs, these simple affairs of Tawheed and Shirk. What is Tawheed? What is Shirk? How does it become Shirk? What things are Shirk? How does a person implement his Tawheed? These things are things that, he says, هذه الأمور واضحة. These are things which are clear. They're clear things that everyone can understand. The commoners can understand them too. Then he gives examples that they use, for example, Surah Ali Imran. The ayah in Surah Ali Imran, where he says that some of the ayat are mutashabihat. Mutashabihat meaning like they have like they're confusing, or they can have meanings which are similar to other ayats in the Quran. So they'll use this to say that the Quran has ayat which are mutashabihat. They're not clear. They're not clear. So how are you going to understand them? Only the one who is deep in knowledge is going to understand the Quran, therefore. So they'll use an ayah like this, he says. But then the Shaykh, he says that this ayah in Ali Imran, where it says that there are certain ayat which are mutashabihat, that they are, as a translation, that they are unclear, or there are other ayat which are similar to them. He says that in the Quran there are things which require you to have a certain amount of knowledge for you to understand them. You need to have a certain degree of knowledge to understand them. He says that's fair enough. And they need to be, that you need to have explanation to understand them. That there might be parts of the Quran, aspects, ayat, surahs in the Quran, that you're not fully able to understand except if you have a certain degree of knowledge, or except if you are given an explanation to those things, that otherwise you wouldn't understand them. And he says, so this ayah, that where it says that there are things which are unclear, or there are ayat which are similar to each other, and they have similarities, therefore it becomes difficult to understand. He says, how do you understand this ayah? What does it mean? That are there things which are unclear in the Quran? He says that this is explained. A person, if he looks into the Quran, then this is explained by other ayats in the Quran. So you understand what the meaning of it is, that there are things which are there are similarities in the Quran. This is understood by looking at the Quran as a whole. And so other aspects of the Quran, other ayat in the Quran, they will explain to you what those things are which may appear on the surface to you that there is some unclarity there. That you might read an ayah and there's some unclarity in this ayah. But then the Shaykh says, you look at the other ayat in the Quran, the rest of the Quran, other ayat, other surahs in the Quran, and as a consequence of reading those, they will explain to you what this apparent unclarity was to you in this first ayat that you read. So he says, this is how you understand these ayat, where you see that there is some unclarity. Look at the other ayat and they'll explain those things to you. He says, as for, so then the next part of from the book, the text, he says, and whoever sought guidance from them, so these people now, they've said that the Quran and the Sunnah, it can't be understood apart from the one who has the great amount of knowledge, and he has these high level conditions, that if he has these high level conditions, then only he can understand the Quran and the Sunnah. Such that these conditions, as they say in the refutation of it, that so high are these conditions, so strict are these conditions, that you wouldn't even find them in Abu Bakr Siddiq or Umar radiallahu anhum. You wouldn't even find these kind of strict conditions in Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhuma. You wouldn't even find them in them. That's how strict these kind of conditions are. And they then say, these ones who say that you can't understand it, only the deeply grounded ones can understand it. They say, and whoever sought guidance from them, like the Quran and the Sunnah, then he is either a zindiq, a heretic, or a mad person. This is what they said. Why? Because they said, due to the difficulty in understanding them both. So they said the Quran and the Sunnah, it can't be understood by the commoners. The common person who doesn't have any knowledge, he doesn't have any understanding, he can't understand it. Therefore they say, due to the difficulty in understanding them both, the one who tries to do that, he's either a zindiq, they say, or he's a mad person, because of their belief that only the mujtahid mutlaq can understand the Quran and the Sunnah. So then he says, so glorified is Allah, and by His praise, how much has Allah explained, both legislatively in the Sharia and by way of the divine decree, and also by way of His creative ability and His legislative command, in refuting this cursed doubt. And here the Shaykh said that there are many evidences Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought in the Quran and the Sunnah explaining to you the refutation of this doubt. The refutation of this doubt that only the firmly grounded people can understand what this religion is about. Only the firmly grounded people can understand what the Kitab and the Sunnah is about. He says, how many evidences has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given to you explaining the refutation of this? Then from amongst these things he mentioned ayat where it says that firstly he says that the mubtadi'ah, the reason why they do this, he explains the reason why they say this, that only the one who is firmly grounded in knowledge can understand the Quran and the Sunnah. The reason for saying this, he says, is that they make these difficulties and these very high level conditions and extremely difficult conditions for anyone to achieve. Like we said, that even Abu Bakr and Umar, they might not have these conditions within them. They make these extremely difficult conditions and high level conditions. They put these down in order from themselves for a start. They bring these conditions from themselves. It's not there's something they found in the Quran and the Sunnah, that a person can only understand the Quran and the Sunnah if he has these certain conditions. They've brought these conditions about from themselves, and they've put them down themselves. And the reason for that is, and you don't find even Abu Bakr or Umar who have these conditions in them. And this, within it, is a ta'til lil-umur. He says that what they want to do with this is like to break down the affair. They want to break down the affair of gaining knowledge. They want to break this down to the extent that everybody has to go to, therefore resort to a blind following. Because if you convince the people now that you can't understand the Qur'an and the Sunnah, only the ones who are firmly grounded can understand this, the ones who have these high level conditions, then the people, they have nothing left. They have to resort to blind following of the people. And he says they do this in order that the people then blindly follow their scholars, and they take knowledge from their scholars only, from their people who are in charge, and they blindly follow them and imitate them, and that's the end of the affair. And that they don't return back to the Qur'an and the Sunnah, because they have not got it into their heads that you can't understand the Qur'an and the Sunnah. So you've just got to return back to the X, Y, and Z. So all of their affair and all of their gaining their knowledge goes back to these particular individuals, and they don't ever return back to the Qur'an and the Sunnah. So what they've done is they've separated the people from the Qur'an and the Sunnah by implementing this principle and putting this principle into the heads of the people. And the Shaykh says, هذا ضلال. This is pure misguidance. This is misguidance. This kind of principle that you can't understand the Qur'an and the Sunnah, therefore you've got to go to X, Y, and Z. He's the only one who's going to be able to explain these things to you. Otherwise, you're not going to understand anything yourself. He says this is misguidance, this kind of principle. Because he says that the person, he doesn't just blindly follow. A person, he doesn't blindly follow things. Rather, he says, إِنَّمَا يَتَّبِعْ. He follows the evidences. He follows things. He follows evidences, the Qur'an and the Sunnah. He doesn't just blindly follow an individual. That's not the way that a person does, or how a person learns his religion. He says, يَقْرَأ al-kutub. He should read books. He reads books to try and gain some understanding and to read into them and to understand, to learn more about his religion. وَيَسْمَعْ أَهْلَ الْعِلْمِ. And he listens to the scholars. So it's not just how they've said it. You can't understand. You've got to go to the X, Y, and Z. Rather, the Shaykh says a person doesn't do blind following. Rather, he follows the Qur'an and the Sunnah by reading books and listening to the people of knowledge and gaining knowledge from the people of knowledge with their evidences when they explain things. Then he moves on to the ayah. He says, Shaykh Ḥasan al-Banna, he says, the ayah, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنِ. Do they not ponder over the Qur'an? This ayah, do they not ponder over the Qur'an? أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنِ. Do they not think about and reflect and ponder over what has come within the Qur'an? He says this ayah is general to everybody. This ayah is general for everyone. This address or this request or this statement is for everyone. It's saying to everyone, do you not ponder the Qur'an? This ayah is not just for these people who they've put the conditions up, that if he's a mujtahid, he's got these high level conditions and he's firmly grounded in knowledge and he's got this and he's got that this ayah is only for that person, that it's saying to him, do you not ponder the Qur'an? Rather, the Shaykh says this ayah is for everyone. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do you not ponder the Qur'an? Everyone, the commoner, whether he be the commoner or whether he be the alim, or whether he be the one who's firmly grounded, everyone. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to everyone, do you not ponder the Qur'an? Do you not reflect upon the Qur'an? Do you not look into the Qur'an? He says this is common for everyone. And he says the commoner, when he does this, he implements this ayah by pondering over the Qur'an and looking into the Qur'an. He'll get from this ayah, he'll get from the Qur'an and the Sunnah what he is able to get in terms of his level of knowledge. So he has a particular level of knowledge. When he reads the Qur'an, he understands a certain amount. A person who's been studying for longer and more time than him, when he reads the Qur'an and the Sunnah, he'll understand more things. A person who has a greater degree of knowledge will understand more things. And like that, levels. So a person, in terms of what level he's at, will understand that amount in accordance to his level. So he said the commoner will understand a certain amount, and the scholar will understand a certain amount, and the one who is like the higher of the great scholars, the big scholars, the rasikh fil ilm, he'll understand a greater amount more. So in accordance to the level of knowledge you'll have, when you read the Qur'an and the Sunnah and you look into it and you study it, you'll gain and you'll benefit in accordance to how much you have. And that's in opposition to what they've said. They've said, it doesn't matter how much you've got, if you're a commoner and you've not reached these levels, these conditions, you're not going to understand anything. So this is a refutation of them, that it's not like that. Rather, even the commoner who doesn't reach these high level conditions, even the commoner, when he reads the Qur'an and the Sunnah, he'll understand to his level of understanding. So if he's got a small level of understanding, he'll understand that small amount from the Qur'an and the Sunnah. He's got a high level of understanding, he'll understand a high level of benefits and other fawaid from when he reads a hadith. Like a commoner, he might read a hadith and only get 1 or 2 benefits because he doesn't know much more than that. But a scholar might read a hadith and bring out 100 benefits. So depending on the level you have, that's how much benefit you'll get. He says, كل قلب يأخذ من العلم. He says that every heart, this knowledge which has been sent down from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, every heart of every slave, every heart will take from that knowledge in accordance to the level of that heart, in terms of how much that heart can understand, how much understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given that person in his heart. He'll take that amount of knowledge. And he says, as for what they have said, that the commoner, he can't understand anything, then he says, فَلَا, then this is wrong, this is not correct. That a commoner, he can't understand anything. And therefore, as they said, he should go and only follow X, Y, and Z. He says, the commoner, he takes what he's able to take. And the one who has studied and he's gained more knowledge, he takes what he's able to take. And for the scholar who's got even more knowledge, he takes a higher level in accordance to what he's able to take. So he says, every heart takes in accordance to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him in terms of his understanding. And he says, it is not correct, this speech is not correct, that we can't understand anything, that the commoners can't understand anything. And he kept mentioning this point a lot, and he repeated it 3 or 4 times, this principle, this refutation of this principle, that the commoner, he can't understand anything. This is what they're saying. The commoner can't understand anything. This is the 3rd or the 4th time now here. He says the same thing again. He says, this is not correct, that the commoner, he can't understand anything. And like they said, that only the al-mujtahid, al-muṭlaq, the one who has these high levels of conditions, that he's memorized this and he's done this and he's done that, and he's got, he's firmly grounded in knowledge, he's at a high level, only he can understand the Qur'an and the Sunnah. He says this is not correct. Every heart will take in accordance to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him in terms of understanding. He says, as for the conditions, he says sometimes you see that the scholars, they'll have conditions for who a mufti can be. And this is from you read it in books and things, and it's mentioned in books of Usul and things, that a mufti has to have certain conditions. You can't be a mufti until you have certain conditions. So he's going to explain that now, so you can understand that with this doubt, so that you don't fall into start saying that the mufti, he doesn't have any conditions. He says, yes, the mufti, he has certain conditions. A mufti has to have certain conditions in order to give fatwas, in order to give the Islamic rulings. He has to have certain conditions. He says, that's true. But he says, how do we understand that? And at the same time, don't fall into the doubt that they brought. And we start saying that therefore no one can give fatwas. He says the meaning is that these conditions that are placed upon a mufti, and there are several conditions for a mufti to be a mufti. He has to have understanding of the religion, he has to understand all aspects of the sunnah, how to bring them together, etc. These conditions, he says, have been put down because the mufti, he is the one who has to look into the evidences and derive from the evidences things which might be unclear and things which might be difficult to take out, things which are hidden. Because a person might ask a question concerning a certain issue, and this issue, it requires for that mufti to look into the evidences and delve deep into certain aspects of the religion, to delve deep into this topic and to this topic, and to bring these things together until he can bring out an answer. And he says that kind of thing, that's not going to happen with a commoner. That's why the shurut for a mufti are there, that a mufti has to have a certain amount of knowledge, and he has to have certain conditions, because he's going to be involved in doing that kind of thing, delving deep into the sunnah here and there in order to bring out rulings. And a commoner can't do that kind of thing. But that still fits in what we said before, which is that the commoner, he's not expected to do that anyway. You don't expect the commoner to give you a fatwa. A fatwa is from the person who has that greater degree of knowledge. So there's no contradiction between this and what they said. Because what they said was that totally a commoner can't understand anything. What we're saying here is that the mufti, he has conditions, but those conditions are there because he is going to do something that the commoner is not going to do anyway, which is that delving deeply into the sunnah and looking at things which are hidden and are difficult to extract. So that's the difference between what we're saying here and what they said there. He says, as for the mubtadi'ah, the innovators, then they make things difficult. They purposely make things difficult and complicated in order that they can then make the people become blind followers, and therefore remove them from the book and the sunnah. They purposely tell the people, you can't understand anything. You don't have any knowledge. You're not able to read the Qur'an and the sunnah. Therefore, they do this in order to separate the people from the book and the sunnah. Because if a person then has it in his head that he's not able to understand the book and the sunnah, then he leaves the book and the sunnah and he returns only to these for certain leaders of his and to take knowledge from them. Another difference the Shaykh gives, he says, another difference between the mufti and the common person is that the ayah that we mentioned previously, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, that do they not ponder concerning the Qur'an, do they not reflect upon the Qur'an? He says that is not something specific to the mufti. We're not saying that a person who's a mufti and he's got these certain conditions in him, that he's the only one who's able to ponder in the Qur'an, and he's the only one who's able to reflect upon the meanings of the Qur'an. He says everyone can reflect and ponder upon the meanings of the Qur'an. And he can take, as he said before, he takes, after pondering and reflecting, that which Allah has opened up to him, what Allah has given him in terms of understanding, then he takes that amount. And it's not something that we say it's specifically for the mufti, that this pondering and reflecting in the Qur'an is only for the mufti and only he can extract the benefits. Rather, this is for everyone, and everyone can take in accordance to how much knowledge they have. And as for al-Ifta, giving fatwas, Islamic rulings and legislations in regards to questions that come, then he says this is something which needs knowledge. It needs knowledge. You need to have a certain amount of knowledge to be able to do this and to delve into different aspects of the Sunnah to give answers. And you need to understand the affairs. You need to understand what the issue is. Somebody might ask you a particular question. You need to understand what that particular question is about. What are the different things linked to that question? Does that question go out to this aspect? Does it go out to that aspect? There may be several other aspects linked to that question. So the mufti is the one who understands these kind of things. When a question is asked, then he knows that this question, it covers this point and this point and this point. So therefore he joins between those points and looks into the Sunnah within all of those points and gives a relevant answer. And this is something which needs knowledge. A commoner can't do this thing. But the commoner, he takes in accordance to the knowledge that he has. And he says, giving fatwas, this is something which is fard kifaya. Fard kifaya, it's not obligatory upon all of the people. We don't say that the commoner, you ask the commoner to go give you a fatwa and he has to give you a fatwa. He says that giving fatwas, giving these Islamic rulings is for the one who is the mufti, who has the higher degree of knowledge. And he says these conditions that are placed on a mufti, that you say a mufti needs certain conditions to become a mufti in order to be able to do the affairs that we've just mentioned, looking into the Sunnah and different aspects of the Sunnah to give an answer. He says these conditions are for the mufti in these affairs, the affairs that are difficult to understand and you need to combine between the Sunnah. He says as for other things like Tawheed, he says as for Tawheed, then these rules aren't there. We don't say that a person has to be a mufti in order for him to understand Tawheed. Or rather, everyone understands Tawheed. Tawheed is something which the commoner understands and the alim understands. He says this is not something that you put these same conditions upon. That you say that a person can, like we've just said now, you can't delve into the Sunnah and give these Islamic rulings until you're a mufti. He says we don't say that for Tawheed. We don't say that you can't understand Tawheed and you can't understand the shirk and what these affairs are until you reach the level of mufti. He says that's the difference here. With Tawheed, everyone understands Tawheed. The commoner, he understands Tawheed, what Tawheed is, what the conditions are, what shirk is, how you fall into shirk, how you avoid it. He says these things are clear for everyone and there's no conditions on those things, that you have to reach a certain degree in knowledge until you understand them. He says, but, so why is it therefore that some people still don't understand? Because then the next part of in the text, the next part of the text it says, so glorified is Allah, and by His praise, how much has Allah explained, both legislatively in the Sharia and by way of divine decree, and also by way of His creative ability and His legislative command in refuting the cursed doubt. That's the bit that we mentioned. That the Shaykh says there are many evidences which refute this doubt. Then he says, from a variety of different angles, these refutations of this doubt have come, that have become general necessities in knowledge. Necessities that everybody knows this. Everyone knows the refutation of these things, but most of mankind do not know. So why do most of mankind do not know? Then he gives these evidences from the Qur'an. So he gives the ayah, he says the meaning of the translation. Indeed, the word of punishment has proved true against most of them. So they will not believe. Verily we have put on their necks iron collars reaching to chins, so that their heads are forced up, and we have put a barrier before them, and a barrier behind them, and we have covered them up, so that they cannot see. And this is what the Shaykh said in one of the evidences he brought. He says in parts of the Qur'an, he says, La yubsirun. That everything is made clear to them, and yet they still don't see. It's clear to them, but they still don't see this clarity. So they cannot see. A barrier is put upon them and they cannot see. It is the same to them whether you warn them or you warn them not. They will not believe. That whether you warn them or you warn them not, they won't believe. These barriers have been put up against them. You can only warn him who follows the reminder, the Qur'an, and fears the most beneficent, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, unseen. So he follows the reminder, follows the Qur'an and fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the person who will understand. As for the remainder, then the Shaykh gave different examples from the Qur'an. Some parts he says, La yubsirun, that they don't see. It's put clear in front of them, yet they don't see. In other parts, La ya'alamun, that they don't know. It's made clear to them, yet they still don't know. And then the third one he mentioned was this one, that whether you warn them or don't warn them, then they still won't understand, because they don't do this. They don't follow the reminder, which is the Qur'an, and they don't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the unseen, in unseenness. Then he says, bear you to such one the glad tidings of forgiveness and a generous reward, a paradise. Then that was the end of the principle. That is the end of the sixth principle. So and to conclude the sixth principle, therefore, after all these points, the Shaykh says, so the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed his blessing upon, the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed his blessing upon is the one who, in accordance to this ayah here, is the one who follows the dhikr, i.e. follows the Qur'an. He follows the Qur'an and he fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the one who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed his blessing upon. The one who fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and follows the Qur'an. And not the one who falls into these doubts. The doubts that you're a commoner, you've never studied the religion, you don't know anything, you can't read the Qur'an, you can't read the Sunnah. Every person, he says, every heart, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him a certain amount of knowledge. When that person looks into the Qur'an and the Sunnah, he takes that amount of knowledge that he's able to take. Then in conclusion of the principle, Shaykh Muḥammad al-Wahhāb, the translation, he says, and the finality of it is that all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds, and praise and many salutations to be upon our chief, Muhammad, his family and his companions until the day of judgment. And the Shaykh says that this is from the good things in terms of knowledge, in terms of studying. When you study, when you get involved in knowledge, this is one of the good things, i.e. meaning this kind of ending to the book. That the way the Shaykh ended the book by saying praise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds, and by giving salat upon the Prophet ﷺ, and prayers and many salutations be upon Muhammad. The Shaykh said this is from the good things, from the things which are liked when you're studying. That when you come to the end of a book or you come to the end of a particular issue, then you finish it off by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and by sending the salat and the salam upon the Prophet ﷺ. He said this is something good in studying, and this is something good when writing books. This is something good when a person writes a book or an article, that he finishes it off by saying the praise upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the salat upon the Prophet ﷺ. And that was the end. That was all that Shaykh said. To the end, he said the prayer and the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the salat is good to do it at the beginning and the end. This is something good, that a person does this at the beginning of his work and at the end of his work as well. And the Shaykh concluded on that, and then he said that next week we'll ask some questions over the things that you've studied in Usul al-Sittah over these time periods with the Shaykh. The next week there's going to be like a little mini test, so that everybody revises all of the things that they've done in these 6 principles, and then the Shaykh will ask you some questions next week, or in the next lesson, whenever it is. He's going to ask you some questions on these things that you've studied. Then after that, he says that we'll continue and we'll do some other book. And the Shaykh, he says he's chosen, or he would like, if it's befitting for the brothers, he says that I'm going to pick out six events from the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. 6 events that occurred, different events like the Badr and there's Uhud and things like this, different things that happen in the seerah. He says I'm going to pick out 6 events, 6 incidents that occurred in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, and we'll discuss these 6 events if he says that's suitable for you brothers. And then you decide with the Shaykh. But that's what he says he would like to do then after that. And he concluded on that.